Hey everyone, Mr. MC here. This is a guide for round 8 of the Nations Cup Exhibition Season 2. Let's get this started. Your first braking point is going to be just before you reach the 150 meter mark. You're going to be braking hard for a while, and as you start to turn in, you want to slowly ease off of the brakes. You can let the car cruise for a moment so the car can rotate a little faster. Once the car is pointing where you want to go, you can then start to accelerate. Then stay on the right side of the track, braking between the 100 and the 50 meter mark, or just before you reach the little orange marker on the right. So you brake hard for a moment, quickly ease off of the brakes. Then look for a path on the right as you want to ease off of the throttle as you pass it. Do a little bit of throttle control, start to accelerate as you pass this next path on the right, and brake just before you reach the little orange marker on the right before the 50 meter mark. Brake hard for a short moment and slowly ease off of the brakes. Let the car do the rotation before you fully accelerate. If you do this right, you will not end up going super wide onto the green stuff. Now bring yourself to the left side of the track and brake just as you go under the Dunlop sign just as the new sector starts. Take advantage of the red and white curbs, quickly accelerate, a little bit of throttle control, let the car do the rotation, start to accelerate, and start to brake just after the green turf on the left starts. You're going to use some braking as you just want to fine tune the car to get really close to the green stuff. Slowly accelerate, then brake as the curb on the left ends. Lots of braking control. You want the car to slow down while still having the ability to turn. Then brake nice and early for this final turn. This is almost similar to that of the last turn we just went through. Go for a late apex so the car is pointing towards the start finish line and start to accelerate. But that is all for the lap guide. We'll finish this lap and then we'll go ahead and talk about the strategies. For this qualifying session, you have 5 minutes to try to get the best time possible, and this means that you're going to have 2 chances to try to get the best qualifying time. The tire wear rate is a ×10, so it is pretty high, but you are on the racing hard tires, so that is going to make the tire wear rate a little bit slow. It'll be slow enough to where you can do 2 back-to-back qualifying laps, and your lap time should be similar. So once you're out there, you just want to try to get the tires warmed up, and you also want to try to find a slipstream buddy because you have a very long main straight. So trying to get that slipstream out of someone is going to really help with your qualifying times. And if you do happen to be under the slipstream, make sure you brake a little bit earlier because you're going much faster than usual. And by the time that you are around this part of the track, so the final 1 to 2 turns, hopefully you are within the slipstream range of the car in front of you, so within 3/4 of a second behind the car in front of you. And by this time, you should be able to feel the slipstream effect, and it's going to make your car go a lot faster. And do be careful because it is possible to get too close to the car in front of you if you don't position yourself just right, and you'll have to end up going around them. And if they end up battling with you during a qualifying session, then that's going to cost you quite a bit of time. So at the end of the day, you have 2 chances to try to get the best qualifying time possible, and if you can, try to take full advantage of the slipstream as that will really help with your qualifying times, especially on the main straight. Now moving on over to the race strategies. Don't forget that this is a grid start, so you want to bring the traction control to 1, and just after the race starts, you can then bring it back down to 0 or whatever value you normally have it set to. You're going to want to be careful here because you are approaching a hairpin for the first turn, and if you get the wrong braking point, then you risk entering Punt City. And that's going to end up happening right here as I brake just a little bit too late, end up tapping the McLaren, and I end up getting spun out. And yeah, a lot of shenanigans can happen on the very first turn, so you want to prepare yourself, make sure that you're not the one that's starting all the shenanigans, and hopefully everyone else around you is doing the same thing. So this is the second run, and I had the radar on the bottom right hand corner of the screen to make sure I have an idea of where those behind me are, and I give a little bit of space to make sure that the turn 1 shenanigans, turn 1 Punt City doesn't end up happening again. Sure, I lost position, but luckily this time I didn't get spun out. But going on over to the general race information, we are doing 14 laps at Fuji International Speedway, so this is the one with the chicane that we just went through. We are using racing hard tires, and those are the only tires available for this race, so there's not going to be any sort of tire requirement. The tire wear rate is a ×10, so you do have to be careful about how you treat your tires because this is going to be a no-stop race. More on that in a bit. The fuel consumption rate is a ×3, so there are going to be some cars that do not need to do any sort of fuel saving, but there are some that do need to do a bit of fuel saving to not have to end up refueling. And we do have a very long straight, which means that power cars are going to be an advantage here, like the Jaguar F Type. And you can definitely take advantage of the slipstream here on the main straight, and this is going to be the best place to get an easy overtake done. So for example, right here, I'm taking advantage of the slipstream off of the WRX, and I'm just going to go ahead and slingshot by. He can't really do anything. And if you are under the slipstream, please make sure you brake a bit earlier than usual. It's really easy to overshoot this braking point if you're under the slipstream. So for example, right here, I overshot the turn a bit, and the Subaru is going to try to retake the position, but luckily I was able to defend my position, keep him on the outside, and he just doesn't have a reply to that. He's forced to back out of it. The next best place to try to get overtake done is going to be just as sector 2 ends or just as sector 3 begins. So it's going to be the second nasty little hairpin over here where the chicane is, and you want to try to get the inside position, try to get your braking point just right so you can hook it up at the apex, make the opponent back out of it, and hopefully you're able to secure that position. And before I go on to strategies and best cars to use, I want to show where the penalty serving zone is, and it is not too far into the main straight. This is the only penalty serving zone, and yeah, the penalty serving zone starts right here. You want to make sure that you do not get a single penalty because you're going to slow down quite a bit and you're going to be at a huge disadvantage. You're going to be a sitting duck. So going on over to the strategies, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a zero stop race, a no stop race. Fuel will not be an issue for some cars, whereas others like the McLaren 650S will have to do some sort of fuel saving, mostly via short shifting to not have to refuel. The tire wear is just slow enough to make a zero stop possible, but you do want to do a little bit of tire saving if possible to make your tires last a little bit longer. The best way to do it is by being a bit easier on the brakes. If you're a bit easier on the brakes, so braking just a little bit earlier and not using all of your braking power, then you're going to be able to be a little bit easier on your tires and they'll last just a little bit longer. And you can pretty much do it at the smaller hairpin that we just went through and on this first hairpin or the first turn that we are coming across. Just be careful if you do decide to do the early braking or easing off of throttle and then braking, because you want to make sure that there's quite a bit of space between yourself and the car behind you, because if you do this sort of thing, the opponent might not know or they may get caught off guard and you might surprise them. They may end up punting you, so make sure there's a little bit of a gap between yourself and the car behind you so you don't catch them by surprise. And this will be especially useful if you're near the front and don't plan on making a move yet. You can pretty much just hang out behind them, do a little bit of tire saving here and there, and then you can wait until the later laps before you can make a move. Of course, if you're starting towards the back, then you're going to need to push a bit more, but just try to do a little bit of tire saving if you can, and if it's possible, just so you can help make your tire life last a little bit longer. And don't forget to adjust your brake balance, and that's going to play a pretty big role in making your tires last. So for example, with the F Type, I have the brake balance at 3 to the rear, so +3 or just 3. And that's really going to help make the tire wear a lot more even because the front tires wear a bit more. So by bringing out +3, the tire wear almost evens out, and that is just good enough to make the tires last the entire race. And speaking of the F Type, let's go ahead and take a look at this car just by itself. and we're taking a look at its launch, and it's okay. It's nothing too amazing in my opinion, but it does get the job done. And one of the good things about this car is that this car is really fast. And with Fuji, you have a really long main straight, and you're going to need a fast car with good acceleration and good top end speed, and this car does the job just fine. It's actually a really good car, and it can also handle the third sector pretty well. So if you're looking for a good front engine rear wheel drive car, then this is going to be one of the better cars for you. And its tower rate is pretty decent as long as you move the brake balance to the correct values to suit the car and your driving style. For me, I had the brake balance at 3 to the rear, and it did the job just fine. And it really helped me try to keep the tire wear nice and even, and it helped the tires last all the way to the end of the race without causing too much of a problem. So we take a look at the F Type on lap 7. The tire wear isn't too bad, but I am slowly starting to feel the tire wear kick in, and the tire wear does start to kick in a bit harder at around laps 9 to 10. So that's where you do want to start to be a little more careful about how you're handling the car. So let's go ahead and skip on over to the very end of the race to check out its tire wear. And before I go about tire wear, the fuel is just fine. Don't need to fuel save at all. Just rev it out. And for the tire wear, yeah, you're going to be feeling it quite a bit, but as long as you're a bit more careful about how you handle the car, then it should be just fine. And yeah, so this car has good acceleration, good top end speed, so it'll become really handy on the main straight, and its tire wear rate is pretty decent as long as you adjust the brake balance to the right values. So if you're looking for a good front engine rear wheel drive car, then take a look at the Jaguar F Type. Next up is the Dodge Viper. This car is pretty much an alternate version of the Jaguar F Type. It does have a mediocre launch, but its super quick acceleration will more than make up for it. And you'll notice this as you go out of the hairpins or as you go out of the final turn. The acceleration will make up for it, and you'll be flying out of those turns before you know it. This car also has pretty good top end speed, so it'll be able to keep up with the Jaguar F Type and other power cars. This car is also a bit more stable than the Jaguar F Type. It's a bit more forgiving to use, but because of that, the car is going to be a bit more understeery, so you do want to be careful, especially as you go through the third sector with all the twisty turns. And the main downfall for the Dodge Viper is actually going to be the tire wear. And before I go on, fuel is obviously not an issue for this car, so rev it out. So the main problem with the tire wear is that the tire wear on the Viper is worse than the Jaguar F Type's tire wear rate, so you are going to feel the tire wear kick in a bit earlier at around lap 7 to 9. That's where the tire wear starts to kick in. I had the brake balance at 4 to the rear, and I still felt the tire wear kick in, and the car got pretty understeer at times. So that's where you really want to be careful, especially on this final sector, because the tire wear and the understeer is going to make you a pretty big target. I would say with the Dodge Viper, you want to try to make your moves in the first half of the race, because as the race goes on towards the second half and then the final laps of the race, that is where the Viper will start to be at a big disadvantage and will need to defend a bit more. But it is still a good car to use. It is an alternative to the Jaguar F Type, so if you're looking for something a bit more stable at the cost of a bit more tire wear, take a look at the Dodge Viper. Next up is the McLaren 650S, and this car has a bit of a bogged down launch. It's not the worst launch. It's not like the Audi TT Cup, which is, well, don't even use the TT Cup. We're not going to talk about it here. But going on over to the 650S, its launch is a bit more disappointing, but once the car starts to get going, oh boy, this car is going to be a really good car to use for this race. It has really good acceleration, and one of the better things about this car is that this car is really good when it comes to the turns, especially through the twistier bits in the third sector. So this car is going to be really great when it comes to the third sector. Its good acceleration will help it keep up with those of the power cars, especially as you go down the main straight. If you're under the slipstream, that's really going to help you out. This car is also pretty good on the tires, so if you're a bit worried about the tire stuff, then this car might be one of the cars for you to use. I had the brake balance set to 0 for this race, so I didn't even touch the brake balance. And as long as you don't overdrive the car, as long as you don't push the car too much, then this car should do the job just fine, especially when it comes to the tire wear department. One of the things I do need to note is that you do have to fuel save with this car, but in a way it's not going to be a bad thing, because all you need to do is shift when the shift bar on the bottom of the screen is just past 50% full. So where you see the gear numbers, that's pretty much where you want to shift, and that is the place where you need to shift no matter what with this car. This is one of those cars where you need to shift early, as it loses power when you go higher up in the revs. So you want to shift at around 50% or just above the gear number. So if you're someone who uses automatic gears, you're not going to want to use this car, because if I remember correctly, I think automatic gears just rev the heck out of the car and you're going to end up running out of fuel that way. So if you use manual transmission, then this is one of the other cars that you can definitely take a look at. Just remember that you need to shift around the halfway point of the shift bar being full with this car. Last but not least, we're taking a look at the Porsche Cayman. Its launch is okay, nothing to write home about as well. And its acceleration is going to be a bit more, I guess I'll say around average. It's not going to be the best acceleration, and that is going to put it at a bit of a disadvantage as you go down the main straight. However, if you are able to keep up in the slipstream, then that's really going to help you out in the Porsche Cayman. And one of the best things about the Cayman is that it is really good when it comes to the turns as well. I would argue it's probably even better than the McLaren when it comes to the turns, especially as you go through the twistier bits in the third sector. It just flows really well as you go through the turns, and if you go down a gear, the car will turn even more, it'll rotate even more, and you can really use that to your advantage, along with the fact that this car is really good on its tires. Also right here, you do need to go down to first gear for a brief moment to help the car rotate around that turn, so that is something that you do want to watch out for. Try not to accelerate on first gear, because the first gear is really short. And just going through here, we're going to shift down in a bit as we go through this turn, use a little bit of braking, shift down, and the car rotates even more. So that's really going to help you just fly through these corners and help you keep up with the other cars that don't rotate through these turns as well. And once again, if you're under the slipstream for this main straight, that should help you keep up with the other cars, since the acceleration on the Cayman is not the greatest. And the tire wear drop-off didn't really start to happen until the very last 2 laps. I do want to say that I think it was lap 10, I had a run-in with the AI car as I was lapping them. But yeah, anyways, so the tire wear doesn't really start to kick in until the very last couple of laps. Like, it'll slowly start to kick in at around laps 8 to 9. And then once you're on the final 1 to 2 laps, that's where you're kind of noticing that you're lapping about 1 second per lap slower. But if you're able to take care of your tires and do a little bit of tire saving, then that's just really going to help you out. And yeah, just stay in the slipstream, as this car is going to need it on the main straight. Unlike the McLaren 650S, this car does not need to fuel save, so you can just rev it out. And I have the brake balance set to 0 for this car as well. So yeah, these are a couple other cars I tested. I did test 2 other cars, but they are not good. A Tenza TT Cup. Yeah, I tested a couple cars just to see which ones are really good and worth mentioning. And those 4 cars that I showed earlier, those are just a couple of the Group 4 cars that have a lot of potential in this race. So once again, this is going to be a 0-stop race. The car that you want to go with is, well, you kind of need to find out what your needs are going to be in this race. Do you want a car that can tire save really well? then you might go with the 650S or the Cayman. If you want a car with a lot of power, then you can go with the F Type or the Viper. You have a couple options, so you can pretty much just find the car that suits you the best, or the car that you feel really comfortable driving with, that you know you can get the most out of, and take it out for the race. And I don't know why I did that, but anyways, so don't forget, adjust your brake balance, do a bit of tire saving if possible to make your tires last a bit longer. And for the 650S, don't forget, shift at the halfway point, because that car, its max power is around that area, and it needs to feel safe, so you might as well shift there. And before I go, do not use all-wheel drive nor front-wheel drive cars. Those cars are at a massive disadvantage, and especially with the front-wheel drive cars, the tire wear is so bad you will be forced to pit. You'll end up losing 9 seconds through the pit loss, and that's going to be race over for you. With the all-wheel drive cars, the tires can last the entire race, but once the tire wear starts to kick in, the cars are going to understeer like crazy, and you're going to be at a disadvantage. So do not use all-wheel drive cars, do not use front-wheel drive cars. Those cars will make you very sad at the end of the race. So yeah, I really need to put that out there. But anyways, that is pretty much it from me. If this guide helped you out, you can press the like button, subscribe button, and all that good stuff. And I do have a Patreon, which you can check out in the description down below. But that is all from me. I'm going to sign off now. So this is Mr. CA wishing you a good race, and I'll see you in the next video.